The prisoner's heart was pounding as he heard the sirens go off, signaling an emergency in the prison. He had been serving a sentence for a crime he had committed, but he never thought he would be trapped in a horror story like this. The lights flickered and went off, plunging the prison into darkness. When they came back on, he was the only person left in the prison. He tried to open his cell door, and to his surprise, it was unlocked. With a sense of curiosity and dread, he stepped out of his cell and began to search for any signs of life. The prison was eerily quiet, and he could feel his heart racing with every step he took. As he made his way through the prison, he realized that there was no one left. The cells were empty, and there were no guards patrolling the halls. Suddenly, he heard a faint rustling sound coming from outside the prison walls. He cautiously approached the windows and looked outside. What he saw chilled him to the bone. The prison was no longer in the same location. It was now in the middle of a barren desert, surrounded by tall cactuses, strangely all facing the prison. The prisoner's palms began to sweat as he realized he was trapped in a nightmare. He knew he had to find a way out, but he didn't know where to start. As night began to fall, the prisoner retreated to his cell, which was now the only safe place he knew of. He tried to calm himself down, but the rustling sounds grew louder and more frequent, as if something was circling the prison, waiting for an opportunity to strike. As the prisoner drifted off to sleep, he was jolted awake by a loud banging nearby. He was too afraid to move or even make a sound, but the banging continued relentlessly. Eventually, the prisoner was able to fall back asleep. The next day, the prisoner decided to investigate the source of the banging. He could see now that the dents in the metal walls were getting worse, as if whatever was trying to break in was getting closer. Each night in the prison was a strange occurrence for the prisoner. As soon as the darkness fell, he could hear strange noises, rustling sounds coming from outside the prison walls. At first, he tried to ignore them, hoping that they were just the sounds of the desert, but they grew louder and more frequent as the nights progressed. On the second night, the prisoner heard footsteps echoing through the halls of the prison. They were slow, deliberate footsteps, as if someone was stalking him. He tried to hide under his blanket, but he could still feel eyes watching him from the darkness. The footsteps eventually faded away, but the prisoner knew that he was not alone in the prison. On the third night, the prisoner heard whispers in the darkness. They were faint at first, but they grew louder and more intense as the night went on. The whispers seemed to be coming from all directions, as if a group of people were standing just outside his cell, conspiring against him. On the fourth night, the prisoner was jolted awake by a loud banging on his cell door. It was so intense that he thought the door would come crashing down. He was too afraid to move or even make a sound, but the banging continued relentlessly. Eventually, it stopped, and the prisoner was able to fall back asleep, but he knew that whatever was outside was not going to give up easily. On the fifth night, the prisoner heard scratching sounds coming from the walls. They were faint at first, but they grew louder and more intense as the night progressed. The prisoner could feel the walls shaking, as if something was trying to claw its way through the metal. He noticed that the dents in the walls were getting bigger and bigger with each passing night. On the sixth night, the walls finally gave in. The dents had grown so large that the metal walls collapsed with a deafening roar. The prisoner retreated back to his cell, and he could hear heavy footsteps approaching now from inside the prison walls. He thought that his time was up. But when morning came after having waited all night for death, the prisoner was shocked to find that the prison was now filled with cactuses. They were everywhere, lining the halls and covering the floors. The prisoner realized that there were no cactuses outside the prison anymore. It was as if the cactuses had been transported into the prison from the desert. The horrors of each night had taken their toll on the prisoner, and he knew that he would never be the same again. He was trapped in a nightmare, surrounded by cactuses and whatever was outside his cell. The prisoner knew that he had to find a way out of this nightmare, but he also knew that it might be too late now and that tonight might be his last night.